So Psalms 105 is similar to Psalms 104 in that it's a bit of a prayer of praise to God, with some admonitions for us in here as we get towards the end of it as well. So let's jump in and start reading. Verse 1, O give thanks unto the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. So tell people the good things he has done for you. Sing unto him, sing psalms unto him. Talk ye of all his wondrous works. Glory ye in his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face evermore. Now, this is an important one. This is really interesting because there is a common belief that sometimes is found among Christian religions that God is unknowable and God is just kind of an ethereal being out there, but we're not to know who he really is. But it even says right there in verse 4, seek his face. So that's a more a personal thing, not seek the front of him, seek his face. So kind of a humanoid analogy in there that to be in front of God, be face to face with God, know God, basically, is interesting. There's a lot of those kind of peppered through the Psalms and some of these other books we're getting into later. Verse 5, remember his marvelous works that he hath done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. O ye seed of Abraham his servant, ye children of Jacob his chosen. He is the Lord our God, his judgments are all in the earth. He hath remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which covenant he made with Abraham and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed the same unto Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant. Now just realize in verse 10 here, Jacob and Israel are kind of the same, sort of. So Jacob's name was changed to Israel later on in his life. Israel refers to the 12 tribes and the people that are descendants of Jacob through his 12 sons. So they kind of make a distinction between Jacob and Israel in that verse there, basically. And it says, verse 11, saying unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance. So remember, this is reference to the Abrahamic covenant, part of it where God said, Abraham, you've been so good, so worthy of me. You've kept my commandments, done what I've asked you to do. The land of Canaan is yours for you and your family's inheritance. Now realize Abraham had more than one son. Isaac is where Jacob comes from, but Abraham had another son, and that's where more of the Arab nations come from as well. So when we talk about the land of Canaan or the Palestine, Israel, Syria area in the Middle East, there's Jacob's two families basically that are living in that area. The Arab nations and the Israelites are part of that, and most nations have members of Abraham's family among them. But yeah, those are where some of those common areas are. Let's see. Verse 12, when they were but a few men in number, yea, very few and strangers in it. When they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another, he suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. So if you remember from the history, going back into not just Exodus, but as we look at Leviticus and Numbers, Deuteronomy, Judges, those areas, as the people came out of Israel, they went to the land of Canaan, where there was their promised land, and there wasn't as far as size of nations go, Israel was not the largest nation around. They weren't bad, but there was lots of other people in the area. And I remember they were afraid of dealing with those people, and so they had to do the 40 years of wandering to get the generation cleaned out, and then they could go into the land of Canaan, and they conquered a ton of people that were there as well. And every time they would come in, they had several nations like the Moabites and others that were trying to destroy Israel, and God did not let that happen at all, basically. In fact, verse 16, moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. He sent a man before them, even Joseph, who was sold for a servant. So we've jumped from the time of Joshua taking the people into the land of Canaan to going back in time to Joseph of Egypt. He was the one who ended up with the birthright because he was a righteous son, and his family was blessed because of that. And so that's where we're at. If you remember, the famine came on the land. Joseph saved them because he had been sold into Egypt. So God took something that was bad, selling Joseph into slavery, and turned it into something that saved his people. Verse 18, whose feet they hurt with fetters, he was laid in iron until the time that his word came. The word of the Lord tried him. The king sent and loosed him, even the ruler of the people, and let him go free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance. So this is the story of Joseph that they're iterating here. So going through this quick Cliff Notes version of the history of Israel to an extent. Remember Joseph when he was sold into slavery, he eventually got put in jail because Potiphar's wife lied about him. And when in jail, he talked to the baker and the servant of the king, and the servant of the king reminded the king of him and got him out of jail. He interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh made him a lord. So Pharaoh made Joseph second in command of Egypt at one point, basically. He was that mighty in the kingdom. And he said here, verse 22, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. Oh, excuse me, verse 20, let's do 21. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure and to teach his senators wisdom. Israel also came into Egypt, and Jacob sojourned in the land of Ham. And he increased his people greatly and made them stronger than their enemies. So the famine, Egypt had the grain because Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's dream. They had the grain to supply not just Egypt, but the full, like everybody else. So everybody else who was decimated because of this great famine had to submit to Egypt to get grain. They brought their wealth with them and they paid Egypt, and this really enriched Egypt. So Pharaoh was really happy with Joseph and what he has done. And so Jacob had to come, and they lived, it says here that he sojourned in the land of Ham. And the reason it says that is because it is believed that the Egyptians come from the descendancy of Ham, Noah's son. He's the son that wasn't so righteous. He wasn't the more righteous one of them all. He was, out of the three, he's the youngest, and he was the one that's less righteous. He married a woman who was from Canaan, one of the other groups of people who historically weren't the most active, in the church, weren't really members, part of the people, descendants of Cain and others that followed the more wicked generations before the flood. And so then remember, Ham was cursed because of the dealing with the garments of his father. And so Egyptians, the original Egyptians, they believe came from descendants of Ham. So that's why that's in there. But in verse 24, he increased his people greatly, made them stronger than their enemies. So Israel became a mighty power, not so much under the sojourn of Egypt, but after they left. Let's see, verse 25, he turned their heart to hate his people, to deal subtly with his servants. He sent Moses his servant and Aaron whom he had chosen. They showed his signs among them and wonders in the land of Ham. So this is talking about the plagues. Moses was called to be the prophet, to go free the people, and it said in verse 25, he turned their heart to hate his people. Now this again, if you go back into the story of Egypt, Israel and Egypt, they're in there. The common translation that we have, at least the King James Version, talks about God hardening the heart of Pharaoh. Joseph Smith corrects those to say that it wasn't God hardening Pharaoh's heart, because that doesn't make sense. It's but Pharaoh hardened his heart of his own choices. God didn't do it. And so this is kind of alluding to that maybe God did harden Pharaoh's heart. But this is probably because this psalm was not written down at the time that all this happened. This is a psalm that was written down probably during the Second Temple period. So that is after the Babylonian exile and destruction of Jerusalem. So sometime in there after the Book of Mormon takes off and does its own book, that's the time frame we're looking at. So this is like well over 1,000 years later that they're writing this psalm down, basically. And so they're probably looking at some of the documents which weren't original, but copies of copies, and they had been changed by that time for that understanding to be there. Let's see, verse 28, he sent darkness and made it dark. They rebelled not against his word. He turned their waters into blood and slew their fish. Their land brought forth frogs in abundance in the chambers of their kings. He spake, and there came divers sorts of flies and lice in all their coasts. He gave them hail for rain and flaming fire in their land. He smote their vines and also their fig trees, and brake the trees of their coasts. He spake, and the locusts came, and caterpillars, and with that without number, and did eat up all the herbs in their land, and devoured the fruit of their ground. He smote also the firstborn in their land, the chief of all their strength. He brought them forth also with silver and gold, and there was not one feeble person among their tribes. So this is again the plagues, the many plagues that they happened back then. Egypt, this is verse 38, Egypt was glad when they departed, for the fear of them fell upon them. And he spread a cloud for a covering and a fire to give light in the night. So remember, there's a fire that they would follow, pillar of fire that would protect them between Egypt's armies and Israel, as well as provide them light at night. And then there's a cloud that was kind of the Spirit of the Lord that would help guide them as well on where to go. Verse 40, the people asked, and he brought quails and satisfied them with the bread of heaven. That's manna. So that's in the 40-day wanderings and coming out of the desert and things. Those are the stories. Verse 41, he opened the rock and the waters gushed out. They ran in the dry places like a river. So this is when the people were thirsty, dehydrated, and God told Moses, strike this rock and it would come out. And so Moses struck the rock and water came out from it, and they were able to drink. Verse 42, for he remembered his holy promise and Abraham his servant, and he brought forth his people with joy and his chosen with gladness, and gave them the lands of the heathen, and they inherited the labor of the people, that they might observe his statutes and keep his laws. Praise ye the Lord. So kind of a retrospective of the history of Israel, and really the cliff notes of it, just a real big summary of what was going on through all that time. But yeah, praising God for all he has done to help and bless Israel in the past. So let's jump over to the next psalm as we continue.